My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined that the moment I stepped back onto my own street, dragging the weight of 12 months on the battlefield behind me, the sight waiting for me would not be open arms, not warmth, not even a whispered welcome, but my life reduced to bags stacked neatly on the sidewalk as though I were nothing more than a guest finally overstaying her welcome. Before I go deeper into the story, I want to pause for just a moment and talk directly to you, the one watching right now, because your presence here matters. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the ache of being unseen after giving your whole heart to something or someone, then please make sure to hit that subscribe button right now to join me on this journey. And while you're here, I'd love for you to drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It always amazes me how stories can connect people from different continents, different cities, even different corners of the same neighborhood. And one more thing, after hearing my journey, I want you to rate this story from 1 to 10, not because I need validation, but because I want to know how deeply it resonated with you, how much it spoke to your heart. Now, picture this with me. The sun was low in the sky that afternoon, pouring its golden light across the cracked pavement of the street I used to call home. My boots that had marched across sand, through mud, over the broken fragments of villages torn apart by conflict, clicked against the ground with a rhythm that still carried the battlefield in them. My heart was heavy, but it was hopeful, too. I'd replayed this moment 1,000 times during the long nights overseas when gunfire lit the horizon instead of stars, when the voices of my unit filled the silence instead of laughter for my family. I had thought of the reunion like a lifeline, imagining my husband's arms around me, the soft cries of joy from my daughter, the familiar smell of home-cooked meals wafting from the kitchen I'd left behind. But instead, what greeted me was silence. No one stood in the doorway. No one leaned on the porch railing waiting for me. Just those bags, my bags, lined up with precision I almost laughed at because it was the kind of precision I was used to seeing in military drills, not in the dismantling of a life I thought was still mine. As I stood there, frozen, trying to reconcile the image in front of me with the one I'd carried in my heart for a year, the neighborhood seemed to lean in and watch. Curtains shifted in the windows across the street. A car slowed as it passed, its driver's gaze flickering from the bags to me, curiosity written plainly across their face. The irony wasn't lost on me. After spending 12 months defending freedom, coming back scarred, sleepless, but still standing, I was now the object of gossip, of whispers behind glass. And as I took a step closer, reaching out with a hand that still trembled from the memory of distant explosions, I saw the note. A simple white piece of paper taped to the largest suitcase, the ink scrawled across it in a hand I knew all too well. "Emily, it's over. Don't come inside. We're done." Just like that. Years of love, sacrifice, shared dreams, dismissed in 8 words that cut deeper than any shrapnel I had ever felt pierce my skin. I felt something in me break that day, something that had held me together through ambushes, through sleepless nights under fire, through the weight of responsibility when I had to lead others to safety. And yet, in that breaking, I also felt something else stirring, something I hadn't expected. A quiet voice inside whispered, "This isn't the end of you. This is the beginning." I didn't know then just how true that voice would be, how far this betrayal would push me, how much it would carve me into someone stronger, someone unrecognizable even to myself. All I knew in that moment was that the battlefield hadn't ended for me. It had simply changed locations. I stood on that cracked sidewalk with my duffel strap biting into my shoulder, the weight of my gear pressing down as if it were the last reminder that I still belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was inside the walls of the house I once called home. My name still echoed in my mind. Emily Carter, 32, soldier, wife, mother. But in that moment, I wasn't sure which of those titles still belonged to me. The note fluttered slightly in the late afternoon breeze, its words taunting me. "It's over. Don't come inside. We're done." My knees threatened to give way, but years of battlefield conditioning wouldn't let me collapse. Not here, not in front of the neighbors watching behind their curtains like it was tonight's entertainment. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but silence was the weapon I chose instead, the same silence that had once allowed me to crawl undetected across enemy terrain. The war had taught me patience, control, and above all else, how to keep my pain hidden until I had the space to process it. So I bent down, picked up one of the bags, and felt my chest tighten at the thought that I was lifting pieces of my life tossed out like trash. As I lifted those bags, flashes of the battlefield came back uninvited, overlapping with the betrayal in front of me. I remembered crouching behind a crumbled wall in a remote village, clutching my rifle as bullets cracked past my ears. I remembered promising myself that every moment of fear, every scar I collected, would be worth it when I came home to my family's embrace. But standing there on that suburban sidewalk, I realized those promises had been built on illusions. My husband had written me letters while I was away, letters that seemed filled with love, encouragement, and devotion. He'd sent photos of our daughter smiling at school, her hair in messy braids, holding up drawings that had, "I love you," Mommy scrawled in bright crayons. Those images were my oxygen in the suffocating desert heat, my anchor when grief threatened to pull me under after watching a comrade fall. I had clung to those letters like scripture. But now, each word, each photo, replayed in my mind with a bitter twist. Were they lies? Were they distractions meant to keep me fighting while back home he was already moving on, already packing up my life into suitcases? I wanted answers, but when I reached for my phone, my hands shook too much to dial. Months of holding a weapon steady through chaos had trained my body to precision, but betrayal is a different kind of tremor, one that doesn't obey discipline. I finally pressed call, listening to the ring echo like a countdown in my ear. He didn't answer. I tried again and again until finally a text appeared on the screen. "Please don't make this harder. We're done. I'll explain later." That was it. Years of marriage, our child, the laughter we shared, the nights we whispered about dreams bigger than both of us, all dismissed like an afterthought. My chest ached with something worse than the concussive blasts I'd endured overseas. This wasn't just rejection. It was abandonment. It was betrayal at the core of who I was and what I thought we had built. As I stood there, clutching the phone, my daughter's face flashed in my mind, and I wondered what she had been told. Did she know I was back? Did she know her mother had survived 12 months of chaos only to come home and find herself exiled? The thought of her confusion, her innocence being twisted by explanations she couldn't fully understand, broke something inside me in ways combat never had. I had stared into the eyes of enemies, faced down situations where life and death hung by a thread, but nothing prepared me for the thought that my little girl might be taught to see me as a stranger, or worse, as someone unworthy of love. And in that moment, I realized the real battle ahead wasn't against my husband's betrayal, or the whispers of the neighbors, or even the loneliness pressing down on me. The battle was for her, for my daughter to know the truth of who I was, what I had endured, and why I had fought so hard to come back to her. The evening deepened, the shadows stretching long across the street, and still I stood there with those bags at my feet, caught between the soldier in me that wanted to push forward and the woman in me that wanted to collapse. But one thought pulled me back, one spark that refused to die. This isn't where my story ends. I had fought too hard, survived too much, to let a note on a suitcase define me. And so, even as tears blurred the edges of my vision, I tightened my grip on my bags and began to walk, not toward that locked door that no longer welcomed me, but toward the unknown future waiting beyond the end of the block. The first night after being thrown out felt heavier than all the sleepless nights I had endured in combat zones. I checked into a cheap roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon lights and a lingering smell of cigarettes that seeped through the thin walls. The clerk at the desk didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that. I dropped my bags onto the floor and sat on the edge of the creaky bed, my body stiff from carrying burdens that weren't just physical. The silence in that room was deafening. No radio chatter, no distant explosions, no comrade's steady breathing in the bunk beside me, just me and the echoes of betrayal ricocheting through my head. I wanted to scream, to let out the storm raging inside, but all that came were silent tears rolling down my face as I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I had fought to survive only to come home to this. My mind refused to rest, dragging me back to dusty roads in foreign lands, to nights when I promised myself that making it home would mean safety, love, and family. And now, the bitter truth settled in. Sometimes the battlefield follows you home, wearing a different face, striking in ways you never expect. Morning came with no relief. The motel curtains let in slivers of sunlight that painted the walls, reminding me the world kept moving even if I felt stuck in place. I washed my face in the cracked sink and stared at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My eyes looked older, tired, lined with shadows that didn't belong there before deployment. I saw the soldier in me, the scars, the resilience, the determination etched deep, but I also saw the mother, the wife, the woman who had believed love was unshakable. That woman had been blindsided, discarded like the luggage, now lying in the corner. I asked myself what my next move should be. Should I march back to that house, demand answers, demand my daughter? Or should I stay away, regroup, find a way to rebuild on my own terms? My heart screamed for the first option, but my training whispered patience, strategy, survival. You don't charge into a fight without knowing the terrain. And this battlefield was emotional, legal, and deeply personal. I pulled out one of the letters my husband had sent while I was overseas, one I had read hundreds of times in the trenches. His handwriting scrawled across the page, words of devotion, promises of waiting for me, of keeping our family together until I came home. I held it in my hands, trying to reconcile the man who had written those words with the man who had left my bags outside like they were garbage. I felt the sting of betrayal all over again, but beneath it, a spark of clarity began to form. If he had given up on us, if he had chosen this path, then I needed to choose mine. Not in reaction to his cruelty, but in defiance of it. I had survived ambushes, firefights, nights where the desert wind carried death in every direction. I could survive this too. I had to. For myself, and more importantly, for my daughter. Later that day, I found myself outside a diner across from the motel, sipping bitter coffee that tasted like burnt grounds but felt warm in my hands. The place was filled with strangers, each lost in their own routines, their own small struggles. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel like everyone's eyes were on me. I was invisible here, just another weary traveler. I pulled out my notebook and began to write, not military reports, not mission details, but my own story, my truth. Each word I put down was like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been scattered. I wrote about the fear, the courage, the sacrifice, the hope, and yes, the betrayal. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the pages were filled with the rawness of everything I couldn't say out loud. And when I finally stopped, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe I couldn't control what had been done to me, but I could control how I told my story. That night, back in the motel room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be silent. I wasn't going to let betrayal define me. If the man I had loved had turned his back on me, then so be it. I still had my strength, my voice, my truth, and most of all, my daughter. She needed to know who her mother really was, not the version shaped by bitterness or lies. I would fight for her, not with weapons, but with resilience, patience, and unwavering determination. My uniform might have been folded in the bottom of my bag, but the soldier in me was very much alive. This was a new mission, one I hadn't asked for, but one I was determined to see through, to rebuild, to reclaim, and to rise stronger than the forces that tried to break me. Days blurred together as I stayed in that dim motel, yet my resolve sharpened with every sunrise. I woke each morning at dawn out of habit, as if I were still on deployment, and forced myself into a routine. Push-ups on the carpeted floor, long runs past the edge of town where the pavement gave way to dirt, then scribbling pages of my thoughts, as if they were mission logs. This structure kept me sane, but more importantly, it reminded me that discipline could transform despair into purpose. My first objective was clear: find a way to see my daughter again. She had been my lifeline through the battlefield, the picture I tucked into my helmet, the voice I heard when silence became unbearable. Losing her wasn't an option. I reached out to a legal aid office that specialized in helping veterans. The woman who answered the phone listened carefully as I explained my situation, her tone soft but firm, filled with the kind of understanding only someone who had seen broken families could have. She told me my rights hadn't disappeared just because my husband had thrown me out, that there were ways to fight back, not with bullets, but with paperwork and persistence. For the first time since coming home, I felt like there was a map ahead of me, even if it was full of obstacles. The days that followed were grueling in a different way. Instead of dodging gunfire, I was buried in forms, affidavits, and court appointments. My husband had already filed for divorce, painting himself as the stable parent and me as the absent one. Reading his accusations burned through me like shrapnel. He claimed I was too traumatized, too unstable, too broken to raise a child. He weaponized my service, the very sacrifices I had made for us, and twisted them into flaws. It cut deeper than any physical wound I had sustained overseas. But instead of breaking me, it fueled me. I refused to let my daughter grow up believing that narrative, believing her mother had walked away. Every night, I sat on the motel bed with my documents spread out like battle plans, strategizing with my lawyer on how to dismantle his lies one by one. It wasn't easy, it was exhausting and lonely, but I had faced worse odds, and I wasn't going to surrender. Amidst the chaos, unexpected allies appeared. At the diner, the same waitress who always refilled my coffee noticed the papers scattered on my table one morning. "Custody battle?" she asked gently, and when I nodded, she squeezed my shoulder. Later, she brought me a note written on a napkin and offered to connect me with her cousin, a social worker who could testify about the struggles returning veterans face. At first, I resisted. I had always been trained to rely on myself, to never appear weak. But slowly, I learned to accept help. The social worker met with me, listened to my story without judgment, and assured me she would stand by me in court. That small act of kindness cracked open something inside me. It reminded me that while betrayal could come from the closest people, support often came from the most unexpected places. When the first hearing arrived, I stood outside the courthouse wearing my old blazer, my hair pulled back, my hands trembling despite my best efforts. I had faced insurgents, artillery fire, nights with death inches away, but nothing terrified me like the thought of losing my daughter. My husband walked in with his lawyer, smugness painted across his face. For a moment, doubt flooded me. What if the judge believed him? What if my scars outweighed my love? But then I remembered the countless times I had stood shoulder to shoulder with my unit, outnumbered and outgunned, and still refused to give in. I lifted my chin, walked into that room, and told my story, not with bitterness, but with honesty. I described the sleepless nights in the desert, the sacrifices I made, and the vision that carried me through, the promise of coming home to my daughter. I didn't plead or beg. I simply spoke the truth, steady and clear, letting the judge see the woman behind the uniform. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt lighter. The case wasn't over, far from it. But something had shifted. My husband's narrative had been challenged. My voice had been heard. And my daughter, though caught in the middle, would one day know her mother had fought with every ounce of strength to be with her. Back at the motel, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but relieved. It wasn't victory, but it was progress. And in battles like these, progress was everything. I thought about the road ahead, about the long night still to come, but also about the possibility of rebuilding a life not defined by betrayal. A life where my daughter and I could stand together, proud and unbroken. As I closed my eyes, I whispered a silent promise to myself. This war at home would not end in defeat.